So picture this, a sitting president gets arrested, and instead of mass protests and outrage, the streets just explode with joy. It sounds like something out of a movie, but this is the very real story of the fall of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. It's a story that's been years, even decades in the making. And it all comes to a head on this one day, January 3rd, 2026. U.S. forces, in an operation they call Absolute Resolve, arrest President Nicolas Maduro. Can you imagine the news just spreading like wildfire, not just in Caracas, but buzzing on phones in Miami, in Madrid, in Bogotá, basically everywhere that Venezuelans had been forced to run to?
And, amidst all that noise, all the cheering, you have these incredibly quiet, powerful moments. Phone calls from mothers to the children they haven't seen in years, with just 4 simple words that change everything. You can come home now.
But that's the big question, isn't it? Why would the arrest of a nation's leader, an act that a lot of people would call a foreign invasion, lead to parties in the streets? Well, to really get why people were celebrating, you first have to understand the nightmare they had been living through.
For the millions of people celebrating, this really wasn't about geopolitics or international law. It was about one thing: relief. Maduro's fall meant the end of a long, dark national nightmare.
And that relief? It comes from 3 brutal realities that pretty much defined life in Venezuela for over a decade: a complete and total economic collapse, vicious state repression, and one of the largest mass migrations in modern history. Let's start with this number, 1,000,000%. Just try to wrap your head around that. At its absolute worst, that was Venezuela's annual hyperinflation rate. We're not talking about prices going up a little, we're talking about the price of milk doubling every few days. Your entire life savings could literally become worthless overnight. Things are bad when the suffering becomes a dark joke. People started talking about the Maduro diet. And of course, it wasn't a choice. It was the grim reality of people unintentionally losing massive amounts of weight because the grocery store shelves were empty. People were starving in what should be one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. And if you dared to protest this reality, the response was absolutely merciless. The regime used the military, sure, but also these armed civilian militias, they called them colectivos, to just crush any dissent. We're talking about killings, torture. The International Criminal Court has been investigating this stuff for years as potential crimes against humanity.
So what's the end result of all this economic collapse and political repression? This number, 8 million. 8 million people fled the country. That's a quarter of the entire population. They didn't just leave, they escaped, many of them walking for hundreds of miles across borders. This became the single largest refugee crisis in the modern history of the Americas. It shattered millions of families.
But a catastrophe of this scale, it doesn't just happen overnight. To really understand how Venezuela got here, we have to rewind the clock, back to Maduro's mentor, Hugo Chavez, and the beginning of his Bolivarian revolution.
You can really watch this path to collapse unfold over 2 decades. It started with this very popular socialist dream, totally funded by sky-high oil prices. And it ended with an authoritarian regime desperately clinging to power while the entire country just crumbled around it.
See, in the beginning, Chavez was unbelievably popular. He took Venezuela's massive oil wealth and poured it into social programs that genuinely lifted millions of people out of poverty. But, and this is a huge but, underneath the surface, he was creating a huge problem. He fired thousands of experts from the state oil company and replaced them with political loyalists. He seized hundreds of private businesses, basically wrecking the country's ability to produce anything other than oil. So Chavez leaves behind this very shaky foundation. And then in 2013, he dies. And Nicolas Maduro takes over right as the oil money starts to dry up. He basically inherited a ticking time bomb, and then he drove it straight off a cliff.
Maduro's response to the crisis was like a playbook for how to destroy a country. So, problem number 1, the oil money is gone. His quote-unquote solution? Just print endless amounts of new money. The result? That hyperinflation we talked about. This leads to shortages, which leads to protests. And when the people protested, he used the military, the police, and the courts to crush them, which completed Venezuela's slide into a full-blown dictatorship. And for many, this was the final straw. After a deeply flawed election in 2018, the 2024 election was seen as maybe the last chance for a peaceful way out. The opposition had overwhelming evidence that they won, but Maduro just ignored it. He declared himself the winner anyway and started arresting his opponents. For most of the international community, that was the point of no return.
So the people are celebrating. The dictator's gone. The nightmare is finally over, right? Well, As the sun comes up on a post-Maduro Venezuela, the country is facing a new set of challenges that are, honestly, almost impossible to imagine.
Getting rid of Maduro? That was just step one. The destruction he left behind is just immense. You've got a massive power vacuum in the capital. You've got his allies like Russia and China furious and calling the U.S. action a kidnapping. And the country's basic infrastructure, the power grid, water systems, oil refineries, it's all been shattered. It's going to take decades and billions of dollars to rebuild.
But the deepest wounds aren't in the power plants or the bridges. They're in the people. How do you bring 8 million exiles back home? How do you even begin to heal a country that's been torn apart by politics, by hunger, by grief? The fall of a tyrant is always an ending, for sure, but it's also a terrifyingly new beginning. And for Venezuela, the road ahead is long, and rebuilding their nation is going to take a kind of resolve that's way bigger than any one military operation.